the current situation with COVID and the pandemic and very harsh restrictions on travel have kind of made me revisit some of my old images, and I think that's actually a good idea if for some reason you cannot travel, or maybe you cannot even leave your home because you're quarantined or whatever. Well, in those cases, if you can't make new photographs, maybe it's time to revisit some of your older photographs, because over the years two things have changed. No doubt you have become more adept at working on images. I sure know I have. And second, the technology at our fingertips has also greatly improved. And that's what I actually want to show you with this before and after of this particular image. 12 years ago I shot this in Iran, and I remember being struck by how cool it was that we had this massive mountain range in the background, and we had this guy on his motorcycle, retro looking motorcycle. I also liked it that he was just wearing kind of, yeah, shoes that no biker in this part of the world would ever dare to wear on, it's more like sandals or even flip-flops or something. Another thing that I found interesting was here on the fuel tank of the motorcycle we had these interesting pictures. So anyway, lots of reasons why I took this image, but I also wanted to turn it into a black and white to make it more characterful. So this is my, more or less my black and white that I came up with 12 years ago. And I think looking back at this image with the technology we have today, with what I know today, I can do better. In fact, I want to take it all the way up to here, which I think is definitely a better black and white version. So let me make a virtual copy, and I will just reset that. I'll just copy over the crop and the other things so that I have the same starting point. Okay, so how will I work on this? So I'm going to use the new masking features that were introduced in the end of 2021. And by the way, if you're liking what you see, in a couple of weeks, I'm not sure exactly when yet, but stay tuned and keep an eye on your mailbox, because I'll be doing a two-part webinar on the new masking features, because I'll only be scratching the surface here, but believe it, they are fantastic. They're probably the best upgrade in Lightroom since I started using Lightroom, which is 10 years ago or more. So I'm just going to show you a couple of the cool things you can do, and maybe you've already heard a little bit about it and seen a little bit about it, but I can guarantee you that in the course that I'm about to give, I don't know any course who will go so in depth into it. There's all kinds of beautiful techniques that you can do, but anyway, I'm getting carried away. Let's focus on this image. So the first thing I'll do is I want to make the sky more dramatic. Well, actually the first thing I want to do is I want to convert this to black and white already, and for that I'm going to use one of my presets. I'm going to use, or rather profiles, I'm going to use one of my creative profiles, my creative street profiles, and I think this is actually a pretty good starting point. And I do that a lot, so I'll do the heavy lifting with a preset or a creative profile, so that I only have to work on the fine-tuning of the image. And in this case, that's creating a better balance between the foreground, the subject, and the sky. So first thing I want to do, obviously, with the sky as dramatic is that I want to turn it into even a more dramatic sky. So I'll click on this here, I'll click on the masking icon, and I'll choose select sky, and look at how beautifully Lightroom selects that sky for me. I mean, it's just magnificent. So I'm going to lower the exposure slightly. There's a couple of sliders we can use. Bring up the whites, bring the blacks down a little bit. So I want to increase the contrast in the sky. Clarity is also a really good one to make those clouds a little bit more impressive. And then dehaze is also a fairly, look, dehaze can really make a sky look super dark and dramatic. So handle with care, I'd say, but definitely worth investigating. Now dehaze also tends to introduce a little bit of noise, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to crank up the noise reduction. Let me zoom in at 100%, because I want to keep the noise level between the sky and the rest of the image relatively similar, so that, you know, that it doesn't look as if I doctor the image too much. So already with this one mask, look and how easy it was, first of all, and second of all, look how we made a dramatic change to the overall image. Now, second thing I want to do is I want to brighten my subject, obviously. So let's create a new mask, and again we have a beautiful new tool, which is select subject. And look at how incredibly well Lightroom manages to select this subject. I mean, the windscreen of the motorcycle, the boy sitting on it, the spokes, the wheels, perfect. Just, I mean, for what we're about to do, maybe for a real cutout it wouldn't be perfect, but for like dodging and burning, this is super good. Okay, so I'm gonna slightly increase the exposure, but the exposure is like the sledgehammer of Lightroom adjustments, and I don't want to overuse it. In fact, I'm gonna lower it a little bit, and I'm gonna work mainly with the shadows, because that's what we want. We want to lift the shadows as if we had used a fill flash, and shadows is a much better tool for that. Okay, I also want to increase maybe the texture a little bit, because that'll also draw a little bit more of attention to him, and I think this is looking pretty good. Okay, now what I want to do some more is brighten his face even more than the rest of his body, because the eye always gets drawn to the face, right? So he's in a little bit of a difficult position for that. I can't easily like get to the face. So what I'll do is I'll do another select subject, and this is one of the techniques that I often use. So I'll do a select subject, and then I'll subtract things of that selection to get to wherever I want, because the beauty of the new selections in Lightroom is that you can add, subtract, and even intersect things. So that makes for really strong and easy ways to make complex selections. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to intersect this mask with a color range. So I want to pick the color range of his skin, and as you can see, this already gives me a better selection, but I want to make it better still. I'm going to subtract a linear gradient, because I don't want to brighten the rest of his body. I just want to brighten his face. So I'm going to draw that gradient like this, so that only the face remains. And I'm just going to brighten this a little bit more, you see, with the shadow slider. So this is before the face lighting, this is after. It's subtle, but it's real. Maybe even a little bit more like this. Okay, if I really want to go into it, I can work on his eyes as well. So I'm going to create another new mask called add a radial gradient. And that's also a beauty of the new masking system, is that you can now, these are called components. This is a mask, and a mask is made of the interaction, either the addition, subtraction, or intersection of different components. And so within the same mask, I can add another radial gradient for his other eye, and these two components will now behave as one mask. So in older versions of Lightroom, if I wanted to edit both eyes, I would have to create two radial filters, and each with their own settings. It would be the same settings, but I would have to apply them twice, which also meant if I wanted to change the settings, I would have to change them twice. Here we have one mask made up of two radial gradients, which in this case I combined to create this mask, and I can just edit the entire reach of this combined mask with one set of sliders. Like in this case, for example, I can increase the exposure, see, like so. Okay, what I also want to do is I want to darken. There's two ways of making a subject stand out more. You can brighten the subject, but I feel like we've gone about as far as we can. Maybe we can add a little bit more, but we don't want it to look overly bright. So the other thing you can do is brighten, or darken rather, the surroundings of your subject. Now I've already darkened the sky considerably, so I want to mainly work on the mountain range and the foreground here. Now imagine I would have to paint this selection. That would be incredibly difficult, but luckily it's a piece of cake, because again I'm going to use Lightroom's AI masking tools. So I'll click on create new mask and I'll choose to select the sky in this case, but I don't want to select the sky, I want to select everything but the sky. And the way to do that is to click on the invert checkbox here. So this gives me everything but the sky. And now I guess you already see me coming. What I can do is I can subtract a select subject selection, and this will leave me with the foreground and the mountain range, and I can now simply darken that. And you see, by darkening this, our subject also stands out more. Now another thing I want to do is I want to brighten the river slightly again, because that gives me a nice connection between the motorcycle and the mountain range in the background. So there's various ways to do that. Like, what I think is probably the easiest in this case, I rarely use the brush, but in this case I think it's probably easiest to use the brush. So I'm gonna pick a rather rough brush selection. Let me increase the feather a little bit though, like so. Okay, I don't mind going over the edges. I want to do it quick and dirty, because what I can do again also within that brush mask is I can intersect this mask with the luminance range, because what I want to keep in this selection, the river itself, is brighter than the fringes that I painted on, which is the borders of the river, and those are a bit darker. So if I click on here, what you see is that automatically Lightroom will narrow down this selection to basically include just the river. And I can even tweak this a little bit more if I want to, like so. And now I can, for example, increase the highlights, maybe the overall exposure, and you see I make a very natural looking selection of this river in a very broad stroke of my brush, which I then easily refined with a luminance range intersection, right? So if all of this is rather complicated, well, I suggest you sign up for the 2-night, 3-hour masterclass that I'm going to do shortly, and the dates of which I will announce. And I think it'll all make a lot more sense. In this video, I just want to demonstrate what you can do with all these tools and how powerful they are. I don't necessarily, I can't go into the detail of each and every tool, but I guarantee you that it's going to be a course that you won't easily forget. In fact, I already did the course in the end of last year for my Dutch audience, and it was my best, and also my best selling, but also my best course of 2021. It was really amazing. But anyway, I get carried away again. One final thing that I want to do maybe is two things. I want to draw a little bit more attention on the gas tank here. So again, in the old days we probably would have painted on this, but I don't like to paint because it's sloppy and it's a lot of work. So I'm gonna create a new select subject selection, and I am going to intersect this with a radial gradient, because this almost, with some goodwill, this has a radial kind of a shape. And so I'm going to turn this slightly, and as you can see, because I'm intersecting, it doesn't spill across this here, because the first selection, the subject selection, already limited the reach of the combined mask to just the subject. And then by making an intersection with this radial filter, I can almost completely simulate the shape of this gas tank without having to make complex brush selections. And so in this case, I'll probably increase the brightness. You see how I can make that more pronounced? Super easy. One more thing that I'm thinking of is, in the original color version, I really like the fact that he has these like flip-flops. They're not, he's basically on his sandals on a motorcycle. So I want to emphasize that a little bit more. So what I will do is I will make a new mask. I will choose a radial gradient to make a very rough selection of his foot. And again, this is the same technique. This intersect mode is so powerful. It's the most complex of the three things you can do with your selections, but it's also the most powerful. So I'm going to intersect this with a color range, because I know from the color version of the image that it's actually a light blue, so I can use that to my advantage. So now I have, again, in 2 steps, without having to brush anything, I have made a perfect selection of this shoe, and only thing I need to do is bring up the exposure, and I can draw attention to this unusual footwear for motorcycling as little or as much as I want to. And I'm not going to overdo it, but something like this. Okay, a final thing that I want to show you is that you can also use these masks to kind of change the lighting on your image. So what I'll do here is the light is basically, if I recall correctly, it's like yeah, I'm not sure. I want to give it more of a side lit feel, that's for sure. So I'm going to create a new select subject mask. And by the way, you can rename this, and if you make as many of them as I'm doing, I suggest you should, but then for the sake of speed, I'm actually not. So you see, I could increase the exposure a little bit more, not overdo it obviously, but what I want to do is I want to do that gradually. So I am going to, from this subject selection, I'm going to subtract sometimes it works better with a radial gradient. In this case, I'm going to subtract a linear gradient. So something like this. I'm going to move this a little bit. So as you can see, what I'm doing now is I'm basically simulating the fall off of a light source that is placed nearby. So the front of the motorcycle and him all the way up to like his middle, or this middle line here, will get the full effect of whatever I'm doing, and then it gently backs off to 0, and that's a cool technique as well. So let me, you see, obviously this all needs to be fairly subtle. Yeah, okay, so you can play around with it, and obviously I suggest you do, because like for now I'm thinking that I might have overdone the subject brightening a bit, but that's not a problem. I can go back to this mask here and maybe just double click on the exposure to take that away and only leave the rest of the settings like so. So maybe one final step, I'm gonna draw one last, I want to increase the really dark areas a little bit, because I'm losing a bit of detail in those, I can see. So I'm gonna do like a final select subject, and I'm gonna make an intersection with the darkest tones, so these, right? And I'm even gonna narrow that selection down a little bit like so, and then I can lift the blacks up slightly, maybe lift the shadows some more, so that we don't have that much pure black. Now if I press the J key, I don't have as much pure black, so this will print really nicely. Alright, so that's it, a short and sweet demo of the incredible power of the new masking tools. If you want to know more, I'll be doing a couple of more videos like this in the coming days and weeks. And then if you are really interested to know the whole nitty-gritty about how these tools work and all the fine and cool stuff you can do with them, make sure to sign up for the Mega Masking Masterclass. That's how I've called it, and info about that will soon be made available. Thanks for watching, and see you again soon. Bye bye.